Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to part two of the winter maintenance course. My name is Mike Fitch with the Ohio LTAP Center here at ODOT, and we appreciate your participation in this training. Please note that today's session is the second of a three-part webinar series, and part three will be tomorrow afternoon. As we get started, please take a moment to locate the questions box in the GoToWebinar panel, and if you could, go ahead and type in your initials and send those to us as an informal roll call for today's session. And we can also see the questions box is working today. I see those initials arriving, so thank you for that. Throughout the course presentation, please use the questions box to send in any questions you might have, and I'll be dispatching those periodically to the instructor for comment. Looking also at the GoToWebinar panel, please note the handouts section. And we have 5 PDF resources that are posted there for you, and those are available for reference also. So with that, we're going to go ahead and turn things over to Bruce Drews, and thanks again, everyone, for joining us today. Bruce?
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it very much, all those that are in attendance. And we had a great little session yesterday talking about winter maintenance plans. Today we're going to be talking about, the equipment that we use to take and plow and move that snow. And then we'll also have a little conversation about winter survival. Then, of course, tomorrow we're going to spend pretty much the entire session talking about all the various chemicals that they have out there for us to take and be able to address the issue of snow. One of the things, though, that I want to mention is that, and I talked a little bit about it yesterday, is that I spent a number of years with the Idaho Transportation Department plowing snow over in eastern Idaho. And one of my favorite things to do when I was over there was to actually plow snow. It sounds a little sick, I know, but I'm a kind of that type of individual. My favorite time to plow snow is early in the morning, 4 or 5 o'clock, before the traffic came around and got on top of the snow and started packing it down. But it was always so beautiful traveling out through the farm ground with looking at the Teton Mountains as the sun came up over them. But so it was very enjoyable. But kind of our goals for today, the objectives that we have today is we're going to discuss the pre-winter equipment checks. The things you should do with the equipment before you go out and actually start plowing snow. We're also going to talk a little bit about right-of-way control. Because as we're taking and the snow comes in, we need to take and be able to have some place to put that snow. And also some of the things in the right of way creates problems for us to plow that snow and have some place to store it. And especially in the municipalities, you're very limited on where you can store that snow. So a lot of the times you end up picking it up and hauling it, and we'll also talk about that. So we'll talk also about proper winging and use of that motor grader. And one of the big things that I'll keep emphasizing throughout this entire program today is, understanding, the procedure of moving that snow. If you're going to take and have to move that snow and you're stacking it, you're going to create a problem for yourself. And so the ideal situation is to be able to, no matter what equipment you use, of being able to toss that snow out into the ditch, get it flattened out so it doesn't create a berm or a problem for you later on when the wind blows. So we'll talk quite a bit about that. We'll talk about the steps taken to inspect the snow removal equipment. We'll take a look at some of the basic winter survival. I'll be quite honest with you, when I was plowing a lot of snow, I had a couple of incidences where I was stuck and ended up having to spend the night out on the roadway in my piece of equipment. And so we'll talk a lot about some of those things. And then I've also taken in my experience, came upon people that were stuck in the snowbank or stuck alongside the roadway, and they didn't have the right equipment, and they ended up becoming hypothermic, and in one case actually ended up with some frostbite, which is not a pleasant thing to run into. But we'll talk about that winter survival. We'll also talk about some of the other resources that are available to you to look at, snow removal equipment. Some of the tools have been developed over the years. I know I've developed a couple of CB computer-based training programs on snow removal, the equipment, and also the RWIS, the road weather information systems. And those are all available for you through your LTAP center. They have copies of them, and they're more than willing to take and share that information with you. So we'll talk about some of those other resources. So if we could, I'd like to begin this session with a question. And so if you can take care of that for me, Mike, I'd greatly
Yeah.
appreciate it.
Yes. So our first poll question today, we're going to have two parts of it. What types of equipment do you use for snow removal? So we've listed several options on this page, and then we'll give you several more options on the next page. But you can select as many of these items that are applicable to you. So we'll give everybody some time to submit those responses. And very good. People are voting. Got about 55% of the group, 65%. All right, very good. About 80% of the group has voted. Let's see what we have. So Bruce, 17% said motor grader with wing and V plow. 53% said loader. 69% said pickup truck with plow. 31% said rotary or snow blower, and 63% said others.
Okay.
So
Thank you,
we'll go,
Mike.
yeah, can we go ahead to the second part? Give some additional options here. Okay, so part two of the same question. Here's a few other options. And see if anybody is using these. Okay, very good. We'll give a few more seconds. Okay, let's see what we have. So Bruce, 77% said they're using a truck with sweep plow side cast, 14% truck with sweep and wing, 16% truck with underbody plow, 7% truck with tow plow.
Excellent. Excellent. So when you take a look at, there's a lot of different types of equipment that we use depending upon the agency and the organization to take and move snow. And moving that solid snow is one of the most effective ways of taking and being able to clear out some of the roads so that people can travel across it. And Ohio has been very progressive. I know that in the types of equipment, because you see that you have a number of trucks with the side sweep plow, trucks with wings, underbody plows, the tow plows. I know those are probably more used in the DOT on the interstate type of system. The pickup with plows, a lot of the smaller agencies, that's one of their primary tools that they use, that and the loader. And so there's a lot of variety of types of equipment. And all those different types of equipment, you've got to take and know that piece of equipment. Know, the the cutting edges, know how to operate that piece of equipment, especially in snow removal, where you're taking and most of the time you're out there operating in hazardous conditions. It might be snowing, it might be blowing, it might be taking and doing a lot of other things. And you've got to have that muscle memory to take and be able to react as that piece of equipment is impacting those drifts of those plow of the snow or impacting those banks that you're taking and pushing against to get that snow moved off the roadway. And the other part of it is as you're operating that piece of equipment, you need to know your route. Where is it going to take and build up a snowbank? And how can you take and keep that snowbank from building up so quickly? You've got to take and be aware of, where are the hazards along your route? Do you have some guardrail along that route? Do you have a railroad grade crossing in that route that, if you're not take careful on that railroad grade crossing and you snag those tracks, you're going to have a major problem. I had a young man that was working for me back when I was in maintenance that ended up taking and hitting a set of tracks doing about 20 miles an hour. And when I arrived on the scene of the crash, his truck was sitting on top of his plow, which was not a good item for the truck or the plow. And so you need to know where those issues are that you're going to possibly hit. The other thing that you need to take and be aware of is, if you have a sander that's on your truck or in the back of your pickup or in one of the other types of equipment that you're using, you need to calibrate that sander. An analogy that I use quite often is, especially in the Midwest where you have a lot of corn crops. Corn is a crop that takes and uses a lot of the nutrients out of the soil. So most farmers that take and replant corn have to fertilize their ground as they're planting their corn to get that corn to grow right. And if you think, oh, well, a little bit of fertilizer is going to be good for that corn, so maybe I should put more. Well, you put more fertilizer in that corn crop and you're going to burn that corn. You're going to kill your corn. You're going to have problems with that corn. And it's the same thing with those abrasives, with those chemicals, with those other items. If you should only use what you need, because if you use more than what you need, you're going to create yourself problems in your infrastructure. You're going to take in your sidewalks, and then if you're using a sodium chloride or a magnesium chloride or calcium chloride, you can take and cause that sidewalk to spald because you're causing so much in expansion and contraction because it's not freezing and staying frozen. You can take and cause rust on your equipment as well as your rebar in your bridges and your other structures. And so you need to know how much material you're putting down to do the job, but also not putting extra because it's a cost to your organization as well as a cost to your infrastructure, a cost to your vehicle. All those things are costs that you need to take into consideration. The other thing is you need to take and before the snow weather ever starts to fly, because like I said yesterday, we've already had snow here in Idaho, and we'll be getting more here a little later on this week, and so we're going to start plowing here in the next couple of weeks, plowing some of our high roadways. So the agencies there in Ohio, you need to take and check your cutting edges. Make sure that you have plenty of cutting edge on your motor graders or on your plows or on your wings, and that you're taking and aware of where you're at so that you can change that cutting edge before you get down into the frog of that piece of equipment that piece that holds that cutting edge on. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot more expensive repairs if you don't take and make sure that those cutting edges are prepared correctly. Now, I have worked with some agencies, that have a snowplow truck, usually a 10-wheel type truck with a sweep plow on it, and then they have a wing that's on the right-hand side, which is typical of a lot of agencies, having that wing over on the right-hand side. I do work with a couple of agencies that have a wing on the left-hand side, which is very atypical. It's not what you normally see, and the traveling population's not really prepared to see that wing over on the left-hand side. A lot of them, especially on some of your two-lane roadways or some of your smaller streets, that wing on that left-hand side, they'll run into it if you're not paying attention to what's going on around you. So it's not typical to see that wing on that left-hand side. Those underbody plows, they're a great device. You've got to take and be careful with those, that you don't apply too much weight, too much downward pressure on that device and starting to cause excessive wear on your cutting edge, or taking and actually buckling your edge if you've taken and put too much weight down on it. So these are all things you got to think about pre-season. Think about how that piece of equipment is going to be used, making sure that you're properly trained on how it's going to operate. And like I said, make sure your sanders, your liquid application devices, all those types of items have been inspected and have been calibrated to make sure you know how much you're throwing out on the ground, because it's very important to make sure you don't overuse your chemicals. We have actually one highway here in the state of Idaho, up north Idaho, that we found that there was so much abrasive being applied to that roadway that when you step behind the concrete porter rail, the concrete rail that was along the roadway, you didn't step down behind that rail. You had to step up because it built up so much abrasive and salt laying behind that porter rail, because they were using so much material, and it was just getting thrown off the roadway with the snow. And so it's creating a problem on that roadway. So be aware of your application rates. Being aware of how that piece of equipment work is very important, because when we get into that snow event, when you have this type of situation, it's too late to learn about that piece of equipment. You're having to deal with taking and moving that snow and deal with those big drifts and those other items that are out there along the roadway. And that's not the time to train somebody about how to plow snow. You're already in the midst of it. Right away, you need to take and make sure that you control your right of way out in your along your roadways, for both, things that, in this case, here we have a farmer that is taken and has a number of bales, and he stacked them up along the edge of his right of way. But by the same token, that those bales stacked up along the edge of the right of way changes that wind speed, so you end up dropping a lot more snow on the backside of those bales. And in this case, this started to build up a snowdrift that's going to cause you problems later on. So making sure that the area along your right of way is as clear as possible. Here's another example where there was some vegetation, some trees, some little bushes that were growing along the edge of the right of way that will cause you problems later on. And I have a friend of mine that he always said, when does a tree become a real problem? And that's when you can put your hands on it, when it's huggable, as he says. But these little bushes, these little items also take and change the wind. So you end up taking and seeing drifts starting to build along where that little bush is. And then that bush will actually end up taking and turning into a drift. And then it's a problem for you during the wintertime. So think about that right away. Make sure that that right of way is clear, that you're taking and you're not creating or going to have a problem resulting from it. Unfortunately, the picture of the farm being close to the right of way, we don't have a lot of control over that, but try to control as much of this as you can. Try to control those areas where you get the snow that builds up that's going to create the problem. The other thing that I want to emphasize is that if you have these areas that you're going to build up snow and it's going to take and pile up, don't stack it. You know, if I take and I came along here with a motor grader and I take and use my wing and cut the top off of that stack of snow, if I end up going slow, I leave a berm, and then all that's going to do is build that snow pile higher. I want to take and be able to cut it off and throw it out so it lays out flat out on top of the snow, so that the wind will take and travel right over it and travel down off the roadway. So we're going to talk about not creating problems as you plow snow. If I came in here, the ideal situation in this type of event is maybe to come in with a rotary snowplow, blow that snow out a little bit, and then cut it off with the wing and make sure you flatten it out. But once you push it out, if you leave it in a berm, it's going to create you a problem and you can't get out there to fix it. So think about how you're pushing that snow. Don't push it out to where you can't reach it and create you a problem unless you're pushing it out flat, so you don't create that berm or that other issue. When you're into that deep snow and you're taking and coming in, and I don't care whether it's a motor grader or it's a plow truck or some other piece of equipment, you know, you want to take and be able to push that material out. But as you slow down, you're going to be stacking that material. And you don't want to stack it in these open areas because it's going to create more of a drift. And so you want to be able to take and keep it within reach if you got to stack it. So then you can push it off the side of the road further and flatten it out as you take and clean up and wing your roadways and get your roadways cleared out just a little bit more. So, you know, here you take and you look at this roadway, you've got a major drift over here on the left-hand side of that roadway. The wind is definitely coming from that left, blowing the snow. You've got a fence line that's contributing to part of that drifting situation that you've got going on there. And so you've got to take and push the hole through it, but then come back and use some speed. If all you have is a motor grader in a wing or a truck in a wing, you know, if you take and you come in and try and take that whole pile of snow, you're going to take and lose your speed and lose your momentum, and you're going to start stacking that snow. And that's not an ideal situation. Sometimes on some of these roadways, you want to take and come in and take a little bit at a time and just, you know, throw it out there way up against that, towards that fence area. And quite frankly, I've done it a number of times. If you have traffic control or you can see down that roadway a long ways and you have a rotary, sometimes I would actually blow that snow with the wind, the direction the wind comes, to blow it across that roadway and out into those fields so that it wouldn't continue to build up. So those are some of the things you need to have a conversation with your management, how they want to deal with some of these problems, how you want to deal with some of these issues. But by the same token, if I came in here and I pushed this back and stacked it up out in that ditch, I can't get to it once it's in that ditch. If I try and get out to it, I'm going to get stuck. So when you're dealing with that snow, you've got to end up taking and leaving a little bit on the shoulder in that first pass so you can take and clean it up correctly. So those are some of the things you need to think about. And it doesn't matter whether you're in a motor grader, you're in a truck with a sweep plow, you're in a truck with a wing. You've got to think about where you're putting that snow and how you're going to deal with it as it builds up. Because if you don't, it's going to catch up with you and you're going to have some real problems in that roadway if you keep pushing that snow back against the wind. So that first pass of that plow truck, that motor grader, that snow removal equipment is critical. Taking and making sure that you're able to take and either keep your speed up so you throw that snow out and it flattens out, or if you can't, if it's too deep and you have to take and you lose your momentum, don't push it off into the ditch to where you can't reach it. You want to be able to take and reach that snow and be able to push that snow on out away from that roadway, either by the speed of the equipment or by coming in with a rotary or some other type of device that you can throw that snow out. Use that speed and use that activity. You know, using a blade, a V plow, and a wing all at the same time, you know, requires a lot of skill and a lot of practice. And quite frankly, you know, when you have that V plow and you're pushing that snow, and then you have that that moldboard, and you have it down and trying to deal with the snow, and you have that moldboard, that's taking power away from that piece of equipment to be able to do that type of task. So what I have found, you know, is to take and come in, you know, raise that wing up a little bit, you know, don't take it down so far, get your moldboard up off the ground so you can transfer that power to that V plow so you can open that roadway, and then take other passes to take and clean up the pile of snow that you've got built up there in front of that piece of equipment. You know, a lot of people will say, well, you know, it takes more time. Well, that's true, but you're going to be dollars ahead and time ahead by dealing with the snow correctly and getting it to where you don't have those big high banks. You don't have those big high problems with that roadway. So when you're taking a look and you're out there and you're on the roadway and you're winging your shoulder, your roadway, or you're pushing that material back, you want to take and push that snow out into that ditch and flatten it out. Now, once the bank gets a little higher, then you want to take a look at pushing enough snow so you can create a slope to that bank so that the wind can come down over and down onto the road and travel across the road and carry the snow with it. I've got a picture here that I'll show you here in just a moment with that information. But you know, make sure you're not creating a problem when you're out there plowing your roadway. Now, for the metropolitan jurisdictions, I assume that some of you may actually have a snow gate, especially on your side cast type plows or on your moldboard of your grader. So when you're grading that roadway inside of town, a lot of times that the agency will have you drop that snow gate to carry past the driveway and then release the snow between the driveways so you don't take and bury people's driveways. Now that, you know, you've got to be careful, you know, that you know, you don't end up taking and having snow travel across your blade and getting overloaded. But by the same token, that takes a little practice as well, using those snow gates. You know, taking and tipping that blade down into the snow to take and push it up, and now you're starting to pile your snow. When you have your next snow event and you get some wind behind it, that means that snow is going to be deeper and start causing drifts across that roadway. So this is kind of an undesirable effect when you're taking and winging that snow. of trying to stack it up. It's going to create you problems. You want to push it out as much as you can, keep it flat. Here you take a look at on this section of roadway, there's a house that's sitting right off here to the right-hand side of the picture. You can see the trees, the windbreak that's been put up, and you can see what the results of that windbreak is. It's taking and collecting that snow on the roadway because it changes that wind flow, and so the snow drops out. You look down the roadway a little bit further and it's nice and clear. Um, so you've got to take and look at being able to address that issue and that problem by taking and not creating additional problem by creating banks in that area. This is actually a picture in South Dakota, back in about 97. Here they came in, they have a pretty wide open roadway. You can see that the graders or the plow trucks, the piece of equipment that they've ran down there, they've been able to take and keep their speed up so they can throw that snow out to the edge of the right of way and build it up in those areas so that they don't create additional problems as they're taking and plowing and dealing with their snow. Now, in the metropolitan areas, you have a limited snow capacity along the side of that roadway. And so as the snow builds up in that area, a lot of the times, especially at intersections or places where you have crossing traffic, whether it's a driveway or whether it's a business or those types of areas, a lot of times you end up hauling your snow away. Coming back in after a snow event, you stack it up, and then you come in with a piece of equipment, whether it's a lifting type of equipment or a loader or some other device, and either pushing it back away from the intersection, pushing it up into piles, and then hauling it away. Of course, you've got to think about your traveling population because they're going to be out there traveling along that roadway. And if you pile up your snow really high at your intersections, it reduces the visibility of the traveling population to check down that roadway, and you can create some problems that way. So you've got to take a look and have a plan of what are you going to do with that snow. Now, a lot of this snow that you haul has a lot of chemical in it, has a lot of other items in it that can create a issue when you haul it to your dump site. And then it melts off, and then you have a lot of garbage, a lot of other debris sitting there. So you've got to establish your dump sites before your snow event, and most agencies have done that. The other thing that I'd like to stress with you very strongly is that when you take and are hauling away that snow, you've got to take that traffic into consideration. In this picture right here, this pickup that you see in front of the truck actually traveled off of that roadway to the right-hand side between the loader and the truck. They were in a hurry to get out of there, and if that loader operator hadn't paid attention, they would have probably hit that truck as it came out between that dump truck and that loader. Taking and trying to think about that traveling population and watch where they're going. And the best thing is to take and set up, if you can, set up some traffic control, let them know what you're doing, and also make sure your operators are aware of that traveling population in those metropolitan areas, because it's really a problem. You don't want to take and have a crash that's involved with your loader or your dump truck, and then making sure that they know where to haul that snow off to and dump it and stack it as you're taking and using it. I had an agency that took and they had an airport and out on the airport they had a rotary snowplow. A rotary snowplow are really handy pieces of equipment, but the real problem you run into is when that rotary snowplow gets into a residential district, a residential area, or near a house. You've got to be very careful about how and where you're throwing that snow. This vehicle actually threw snow over and broke some windows out of the house that where he was throwing his snow. He was used to blowing snow out on the runway, so he could have his full speed of his fan running, and he was throwing that snow quite a bit of distance, and he ended up breaking out some windows of a house, causing some real problems for that jurisdiction. Rotaries are really great pieces of equipment for blowing that snow, getting it out away from that edge of that roadway. But the person operating that rotary has to be aware of where they're throwing it and how they're dealing with it, and also the traffic around it. Unfortunately, this last winter here in Idaho, we had a rotary operator that was blowing snow on one of our local roadways. Um, got out because he was having an issue with the secondary fan inside of the rotary. Got out to check it and stepped around in front of and had left the auger in the front of the rotary running, and had gotten stuck and pulled into that auger. And so whenever you're taking and leaving your seat of that piece of equipment, you've got to make sure that you shut down that piece of equipment so that you don't have an issue or problem, and make sure it's stopped spinning, especially in those augers and those fans. If you're taking and working around it, you need to make sure that you're following the proper safety procedures for that type of equipment. You need to also be aware of, as you're taking and you're plowing your roadways, you're working along those roadways, you'll have a loaded type of vehicle. They can get fairly top heavy. We actually had an individual that was plowing a roadway, saw a chunk of ice that it was a chunk of ice that dropped off of a semi truck. He dropped his plow to take and plow that chunk of ice off the roadway, not realizing that it froze to the roadway and was very hard. And he ended up taking and pushing himself right off the roadway and flipping his 10-wheel dump truck with his plow right off in the roadway. Be aware of where the edges are, where the drop-offs are at, where the hazards are at, to where if you get too far off into the ditch, you're going to have a problem, because those trucks are very heavy and also can be very top heavy. So being familiar with that road before that snow comes is very critical for those operators and those pieces of equipment. Snow fences and snow trenches. I know that here in Idaho, we have a number of areas that we've taken and installed snow fences. We also take and go out with cats, dozers, and go out into the fields and create snow trenches. So, you've got to take a look at how close you're going to take and have that. This drawing is actually in one of the documents I have attached to this presentation, taking a look at the how far back that snow fence or that trench should be back away from the road. It says ideally the fence should be set back from the shoulder a distance of 35 times the height of the fence. Placing that fence too close to the roadway or putting that trench too close to that roadway, that drift will travel out onto that roadway and cause you problems. So you've got to plan where you're going to take and put those snow fences and those snow trenches. It's just amazing how, 35 times the height of the fence, it should be back away from that roadway. So if you're taking a look at installing some of the trenches, or you're going to install some of the fences, make sure that they've been designed and they need to be installed. The fences need to be installed before the snow starts to accumulate and you start getting your drifting and snow type of situations. And that should be all set up in the policy of the organization that you work for. But by the same token, the windbreaks, the houses, the granaries, the equipment parked out in the fields all act like a snow fence. And so if they're too close to the right of way, those types of items are going to cause you problems in your road. And so you've got to anticipate that. And in some situations, talk to the farmer to make sure that they come in and clear out some of those items and some of those concerns. So you don't have to deal with that really deep snow that you're ending up packing up and stacking along the edge of the roadway. Mike, I would like to take and go ahead and do poll question number 2.
Yes. All right, Bruce, we have launched the question and we'll give everybody some time to respond. Okay, very good. The votes are arriving. Got more than 50% so far. Okay, in a few more seconds. All right, so Bruce, 82% said at the beginning of the shift, 52% said at the end of the shift, 16% said once a week, 9% said monthly, 29% said when servicing.
Okay. Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
Thank you very much. I'm really in thought or impressed that I had as many of the individuals talk about at the beginning of the shift and also at the end of the shift. You take a look at it, you're on a piece of equipment that is going to be out there and having to work in some fairly severe environments. And so I always like to take a look at my piece of equipment. There's the pre-storm type of inspection that you need to, check your cutting edges, check and make sure your hydraulics are full, check and make sure that, your brakes are in good shape, your tires are in good shape, all that type of inspection. But by the same token, there's things that happen when you're out there working on that roadway that you need to come back in when you come back into the shop and check, like your cutting edges and making sure all your cutting edges are still, you have plenty of wear material, but also they're firmly attached to your piece of equipment. Have you ever came back into a shop and found out that on your side sweep, you're missing one of the blades, one of the cutting edges that are on your side sweep? I've seen that happen. Or if you're taking and running a motor grader, and you've finished your shift and you pull into the shop, and I like to turn on all my lights and make sure all my headlights are working, all my emergency, flashing lights, my rotating light are all working, because at the end of the shift, if you just take and park that piece of equipment and then come back in at the next snowstorm or the next event, and it's in an emergency situation, I've seen people just jump into that piece of equipment, open the door, back it out, and head out to go plowing snow, and find out that rotating beacon or their hazard lights or one of their headlights are blown out. Find those before you get into that type of situation. So my preference is, like most of you said, do your inspection, go around, take a look at your mirrors, your windshields, your lights, your cutting edges, your hydraulics, all those different components at the beginning of the shift, and make sure that you don't have loose bolts, you don't have loose lug nuts, you don't have a cracked, um, tire, cracked wheel. You don't have those issues, and make sure you're operating, all your safety equipment is operating correctly. You know, redesigning the drift plane on the snow wing, can be stressful on the machine. You need to make sure that your wings, your cables on your wings are operating correctly. Your mast poles, your wing is able to move up and down your mast pole freely. Those are all things that you need to think about before you ever go out into that environment, that snowstorm, and then have to take it and try and do your inspection. So a beginning type of shift type of inspection, go and check your oil level every day. Make sure, uh, pull that dipstick out, take and smell it. Make sure you're not getting some discoloration that might be an indication that you've got water into your oil or you got diesel in your oil, those types of things. Do that oil inspection. Check your hydraulic oil. Make sure your hydraulic oil is full, and a warning with especially with hydraulic oil. You take and if you have that hydraulic oil and you notice some hydraulic oil underneath your piece of equipment, don't have your piece of equipment running and inspect your lines, because that hydraulic oil is under such pressure and creates a hazard for your hand. That hydraulic oil can actually be injected or cut your fingers and be injected into your blood system and cause you additional problems and issues. If you suspect you have a leak in your hydraulic oil system, shut down the piece of equipment and relieve the pressure off the hydraulic line, and then do your inspection of that hydraulic line. Don't do it with a full load on that hydraulic line, because it's going to could cause you some problems. Watch for discoloration of that oil as well. Take inspect your transmission oil. Make sure that you know how to properly check that transmission oil. In a lot of your vehicles, the engine may have to be running, and before you check that transmission oil. Others, you might have a sight gauge. Make sure you know where those sight gauges are. Look at the owner's manual to see what the requirements are to properly check that transmission oil. Check the fluid in the batteries. Of course, don't have them running. If you have a cap on that battery, you can check that fluid. Make sure that you only use the recommended fluid for that battery. If you put just add additional water, you're going to be diluting that fluid, and then you're going to impact the service life of that battery. Check for corrosion. Make sure that the cables are clean. Make sure they're in good shape. Make sure that they haven't became loose. And also, if you're going to jump start a piece of equipment, make sure that you've referred to the owner's manual. Most of our equipment, we run a lot of diesel motors, which requires a 24-volt system versus a pickup truck where it's running a 12-volt system. You've got to be aware of what type of voltage you're going to be using. There are still some equipment out there that has runs off of a negative polarity instead of a positive polarity. You've got to be aware of those types of equipment, especially if it's an older piece of equipment. How to jump it correctly is very important. Daily check your coolant levels. Make sure that you have enough coolant, and make sure check and find out, you know, coolant is antifreeze coolant is very interesting in the regards that if you take an antifreeze system and you keep putting in 100% antifreeze into that tank, you're going to actually lose the ability of that antifreeze to be able to protect that system. Antifreeze is made to be diluted by 50%. That enables that antifreeze molecules to keep that water fluid. And if you take and you increase the percentage of antifreeze versus the percentage of water, you're going to take and start getting to the point to where that antifreeze is going to freeze at a higher temperature than what it's originally designed. I have an example of that. Actually, tomorrow we'll take a look at an example of that. So make sure that you test that antifreeze. Make sure that it's been diluted as you put it into your piece of equipment, so that you don't create yourself a problem with that coolant level. Air filters, check them daily. I like to take and there's on a lot of our heavy equipment, our motor graders, our loaders, a lot of our larger trucks, they'll take and they have a gauge on them. But by the same token, you still need to check it, make sure that air filter is staying clear. If you're taking and you're out plowing snow and you've got a lot of blowing and drifting snow, it's amazing how that snow can get inside that engine compartment and cause you a problem with the equipment in there. So you need to take and check it, especially if you start, check it daily. And also I like to check my air filters at the end of the shift, making sure that I don't have a lot of moisture that have collected inside that air filter and it's going to cause me problems. Replace it when it's wet, because then it's going to take and plug up a lot more with that moisture if you're getting moisture into your air filtering system. The restriction gauge, it's check the gauge for the proper operation, make sure that the gauge is working, and also make sure that the gauge is functioning, that it hasn't been broken, hasn't been damaged as you've been taking and using that piece of equipment. Inspect your tires. One of the things, make sure your tires have the proper air pressure. Inspect them for wear, for cuts. Also take a look at the lug nuts. If you're seeing a little bit of rusting around the edge of the lug nut, that could be a sign that your lug nuts are a little bit loose. You may need to tighten them up. Also check in between around the lug nuts to make sure that your wheel hasn't cracked. I've seen that happen a couple of times where you've maybe hit something or you've had an impact onto that wheel and it's caused you to have a crack around your lug nut. Make sure that your treads are all good. If you've had that you have plenty of tread for the types of jobs. Also make sure that your tire chains that you may be using are properly installed. They have a lot of different types of tire chains. They have the roller type of tire chains that they develop a sharp edge, and they can actually damage your tire if they're not properly installed. So inspect your tires, and I like to inspect my tires actually after my work as well, to make sure that I don't have, like on a 10-wheel truck, I haven't picked up a rock in between my duals. I haven't taken and picked up some sort of a nail or some other type of device, that I'm going to come back to the shop the next day and find that I have a flat tire. So I like to inspect my tires after the end of my shift as well as the beginning of my shift. If you're taking and running a motor grader, you take and inspect your tandem oil level. Make sure that you have a good oil content and that you don't have a lot of debris or other items by checking your sight gauge on your tandem. And if you do have problems, you want to find that out way before you go out and start using that piece of equipment, because it's going to deteriorate the gears inside that tandem area that keep that piece of equipment working. Check it for discoloration, for grit, making sure that you don't get something traveling into it. Check your cutting edges. Look for wear, cracks, loose bolts. Taking and turning that moldboard, or having that cutting edge on your truck. Look at those cutting edges. You can look at this cutting edge and you can see that it's got a little bit of a bow in it, which is normal for a moldboard on a motor grader as they're taking in and doing work out on a roadway. But by the same token, you know, on a plow truck, or on a motor grader, look for that um, that shallow part of that cutting edge, and make sure that you're not getting into the frog, the place that those bolts hook that cutting edge onto it. I've seen some agencies that are taking and using either a rubberized cutting edge or a some of the ceramic types of cutting edges. You've really got to take a look at those and make sure that they're not breaking loose from the bolting mechanism, or that they haven't cracked. Same thing with the steel or the ice blade type of cutting edges. Take a look at them, make sure you're not having cracks forming in those cutting edges, so that they'll break loose later on as you're taking out there and you're out there working. Grease that piece of equipment. It's out there in that severe weather. Go through and grease it daily, so that you take and can keep that moisture out of those bearings. You know, you want to be able to take and keep that moisture and that freezing water out of those greased areas. So, but before you do take and grease that joint, make sure you clean that zerk, so that you don't take and inject that that dirt that is collected on that zerk into that joint, because that's going to take and cause that joint to deteriorate even quicker. But you need to take and inspect those. Clean your mirrors and windows. Make sure that the mirrors are not cracked. If they're cracked, they need to be replaced, because that crack is going to take and create a spot in that mirror that you're not going to be able to see a vehicle or a person that's behind you, and that can create a problem. Make sure that you have, you know, all the mirrors that you're supposed to have on that piece of equipment to properly see back behind you. Make sure that the windows aren't cracked or aren't damaged because of the same reason. It makes it a little harder to see through it. And make sure that the mirrors are all adjusted correctly, that they haven't changed. Some of the adjustment hasn't, as you're plowing snow and you've had snow come up against you, that it hasn't knocked your mirrors out of adjustment, that they're properly, you're able to see through them. Cleaning the glass, clean that glass as often as possible. And one of the things I talk to a lot of people about, not just the front windshield. Make sure that the windows on the side of that piece of equipment, and also if that window in the back of that piece of equipment, are all clean, that they don't have cracks in them, because you need to be able to have as much visibility out of that piece of equipment as possible. Because if not, You might miss a pedestrian if you're in a metropolitan area, or you may actually even miss a vehicle that's on the roadway because of that crack or that deterioration of that windshield or those windows. Wipers are critical on your pieces of equipment. You need to make sure that your wipers are in good shape, that they're making contact with that windshield, that they're not taking and jumping around on that windshield as you're trying to use them. One of the things that I used to do quite often is, as I was operating my truck or operating my grader or operating the rotary I ran, I would always take and have the window open just a little bit so I get some cool air circulation over against my window. Because if you keep that windshield hot, that snow is going to stick to that windshield. If you take and you have some cool air, matter of fact, in my plow truck, I actually installed a fan that I could blow cold air against my windshield to cool it off, and then I'd actually find that I could, you know, in the snow type of event, actually turn my wipers off and my windshield would stay clear instead of taking and having it fog up and having the snow stick to it. Use that cool air to your advantage. Make sure your windshield washer fluids reservoirs are full so that you can take and if you do need to take and clear that windshield, make sure that you take and have the fluid to be able to clean that windshield. Now, um, also taken and a lot of agencies like to take a look at the windshield wiper brand so that you don't have those gaps in between the windshield wiper and the arm, and because some of those will gather moisture or gather snow. So look at what type of windshield wiper works best for your organization, and then make sure that they're replaced and that they're in good shape. Because visibility out of those pieces of equipment is critical. You're out there during the snow falling, also the blowing and drifting snow, and plus then if you're plowing against the wind, you have the snow coming across your plow right into your windshield, and you want to keep that windshield clear so you can see where you're going, seeing what the obstructions are in front of you. Check for telltale signs of leaks, cracks, breaks, rocks in locations where you don't want to be carrying rocks, like between your duals of your tin wheels or your bobtail type trucks. Check for those telltale signs that you have something going on. Investigate it. You look at some of the older equipment and you'll have some of the old trucks and some of the old graders, and they just naturally leak a little bit of oil because of the joint getting loose or a seal getting bad. Keep an eye on it. Don't let it run out of oil because it's going to cause you problems down the long run. Um, you know, take and watch those points. Make sure that you're not going to have a problem later on. And I can't be remiss on taking and making sure that you use your 3 points of contact whenever you're entering or exiting any piece of equipment. You take a look at a 10-wheel dump truck or a bobtail truck or even a pickup truck. Make sure that step you're stepping out on is cleaned off. Kick the snow off of it before you actually put weight on that step. If it's covered up with snow, and you push that snow down, it's going to compress on that step and make that step slick. So what I'd always do on a motor grader or on a 10-wheel dump truck or any of the other pieces of equipment I'm climbing in and out of, if that step has some snow, while you're holding on and you have one foot up on the piece of equipment where it's dry, kick that snow off a little bit. Clear it off a little bit before you actually put your weight down onto it, because you don't want your foot to slip. and have you fall and injure yourself. But the other thing that I want to take and talk about a little bit with the motor graders, don't put your motor grader blade underneath your steps when you're climbing in and out of that piece of equipment. I personally have an individual that I know very well that he ended up taking and was doing that. He'd place his moldboard up underneath the step, and then he stepped down off the last swing part of the step down onto his moldboard, made a shorter step out of it. But he also slipped one day and fell, and what did he fall on? Right on top of that moldboard. Ended up taking and having a cracked vertebrae in his back. He ended up having a lot of issues with that. So, make sure you have your steps are all there, that they're in good operating condition, but don't take and put that moldboard up underneath those steps. That's going to create a hazard for you. Other safety devices, make sure your fire extinguisher has been serviced regularly and is charged. Make sure you have a first aid kit and that it's up to date and filled, because you're out there on that roadway, you may come upon a crash, an injured individual, and you need to be able to provide assistance to those individuals. And then also on your pieces of equipment, your lunchbox, your thermos. I had a guy that used to work for me that he would carry a great big Stanley thermos. I mean, the thing held a gallon of coffee, and he would carry it inside that truck, and then he'd just lay it on the seat, and he'd hit his brakes or he'd hit a bank or something like that, and that thermos would go flying against the dashboard of that piece of equipment. Make sure you're able to take and tie down your lunchbox, tie down your thermos, that you don't have your chains riding in the cab with you. Because if you end up taking and rolling that piece of equipment, all those things become objects that can injure you. And so you've got to take and think about making sure that cab is cleaned. Don't have the extra starting fluid, don't have the extra chains, you don't have, those big heavy things inside that cab that can take and cause you problems. Make sure you keep your cab clean. Um, Do your radio checks. Make sure that radio is working properly. That's your link to the outside, especially when you're out there on that roadway. I know that when I was plowing snow back in a lot of it back in the 80s and early 90s before the cell phone, that was the only way we had to communicate with our office and other individuals. I was plowing out on one road, I was in a severe weather storm, ended up getting stuck, and I had to call the office and tell them where I was at, and ended up spending the night. So, you want to be able to tell people, hey, I'm going out onto such and such road. I'm going to be plowing out there. I want to be able to communicate, because there's a lot of places in our country that radios don't work real well. We don't have enough repeaters or enough antennas to be able to collect it. So people need to know where you're at, so that if you get in trouble or you don't show up, they know where to go to look for you. Also, when you're taking your start up, and make sure your gauges are working properly before you leave that yard. Make sure your panel, your equipment panel, your gauge panel are clean, that you've taken and able to see all the individual lights. Make sure that your handles that you have for your plow, for your sander, for your other types of devices, you know where they're at and you know how to operate them. You get into some of these trucks now that have a reversible plow, or even a one-way plow. It might have a sanding attachment to it. It may, on that sanding attachment, it may have a liquid pre-wetting type of device. All those are just a lot of extra buttons, and you need to know how to reach them and how to touch them so that they do and they perform correctly, so you don't take and have an issue or a problem. Because generally speaking, you're going to be in a storm type of situation, and you're going to need to touch that underbody plow, lower that underbody plow, or you have to use your wing. You need to take and make sure that you're familiar with those pieces of equipment whenever you take and check it. Check your horn. Make sure your horn works. Check your brakes. Make sure your brakes are working. Also, check your backup alarm. A lot of the backup alarms, as they take and they age and they get older, they stop working. Make sure your backup alarm, because that's what's going to warn those people that are behind you that you're going to be backing up. Make sure that they're aware of those situations, of those problems. Make sure all your lights are working properly before you leave the yard. That they're both your high beams and your low beams, all your warning lights, all your different lights that you have on your piece of equipment are going to operate correctly. Make sure that your signs, the signs on the back of your piece of equipment, your slow moving sign, your stay back 50 feet, stay back 100 feet, are all clean and all visible. You take a look at those signs, and as you're working out there in the field, they collect dirt on top of them to where they no longer become visible. You need to take and come in and use either soap water or a light cleansing type of solution and wipe those signs off to get rid of that dirt and that dust. Don't just walk up to that slow moving vehicle sign or that stay back 50 feet sign and take a dry rag and wipe on it, because all you're going to do is destroy that sign. Use some sort of a cleanser to take and be able to remove that dust, that dirt, that debris off of that sign without destroying the face of that sign, because just like your road signs, that dust and dirt makes them to where they're invisible. You can't read them. And you want the traveling population to be able to see those signs, see those lights, see those warning type of devices as you're out there working along that roadway. Most agencies, have an insurance reserve fund, and they talk about, making sure that you have a strobe light to make sure that the traveling population is able to see you. In different jurisdictions, in some states, they actually use a green light. In some others, they actually use a blue light, but make sure you have a flashing warning light, especially in low visibility type of situations. Turn on your four-way flashers so that you're able to be seen a little bit better. A lot of agencies will install high intensity flashers on the backs of the vehicles or up onto additional stanchions. Making sure your warning signs that are mounted on your piece of equipment are visible and also maintained. And also check those mirrors and those windows to make sure you can see out of them. Those are all your safety devices on that piece of equipment, and you need to be able to use them correctly. Have we had any questions, Mike? Thought I'd check with you.
Bruce, I don't
I haven't
see
seen any
any.
questions come up onto my chat box yet.
Thanks, Bruce. There's been no additional questions submitted at this time, but
So
I
here
want
you
to.
have some trucks, some sanding trucks. They talk about, stay back 50 feet. Truck may back up. A lot of those things get covered with the snow, and so periodically throughout your shift, as you're taking and plowing snow and you're applying abrasives to the roadway, you may need to take and come out and clear off the back of your piece of equipment so that retroreflective tape can be seen. those retroreflective signs can all be seen on the back of your vehicle, and that your lights don't become covered over with the snow as you're taking and plowing that roadway. So you may need to stop in a turnout or a place that you can get off of the roadway and safely get out of your vehicle to inspect it. And be cautious of the traveling population behind you. I actually had it occur one year. I was out plowing snow, and I knew my tail lights and my headlights were getting covered over with snow. I had a turnout coming ahead, so I plowed out and pulled out into the turnout so that I could take and clear off those devices. I looked in my rearview mirror and saw a pickup that was coming up behind me. That pickup followed me right into that turnout, and the individual driving that pickup ran into the back of my truck. Even though I was probably 20 feet off the roadway, they were following my lights and my they thought I was still on the road, and they followed and ran right into the back of me. So watch the people as they're taking and coming up, but pull off the roadway, get out of the lane of travel, and clear off your backside of your vehicle so that people can see you and know where you're going. Any questions about inspection on those pieces of equipment or recommendations from anybody in the group?
Hi, Bruce. I want to remind everybody the questions box is available to you. So at the moment, we don't have any questions appearing, but please go ahead and type in any questions you might have, and we'll get those to Bruce.
I appreciate it very much. I appreciate the questions also. If you do have any questions, don't feel free to take and ask those questions. I'm more than happy to take and address them as we take and go through the program. So let's take and talk a little bit about winter survival. We're out there as we're taking and plowing snow, generally in the worst type of conditions that are possible. And unfortunately, so are a lot of the traveling population. Um, when I was plowing snow over in eastern Idaho, there'd be a number of times I'd be traveling down the roadway and find cars that slid off the roadway, were stuck in the ditch, or and matter of fact, I found one group of individuals that were stuck in a ditch, and I stopped to give them assistance, check and make sure they're okay, and there are two guys in the vehicle and two dogs, and they said that they were just fine. The dogs were keeping them nice and warm, and they'll just sit there and wait until morning. But by the same token, I've also taken and came on to individuals that have been out driving on one of my roadways that I was going to be plowing in the middle of the night, and they got stuck off into the ditch, and they weren't dressed for the weather conditions. I picked up a few people that were very hyperthermic. So generally speaking, when I was taking in and plowing a roadway, I'd take and make sure that my vehicle was prepared. I wanted to make sure that every time I left that shop, that my fuel tank was full, that I was going to have enough fuel that I could actually sit out on the roadway for a day or so and still have enough fuel. I always took and made sure that somebody, either somebody in my shop or somebody at dispatch, knew where I was going, where I was traveling to. That way, then if I had an issue or a problem, I was able to take and call them and get rescued or have emergency services come out if I needed them. They talk about, winter survival kit for your vehicle, taking a look at having flares, roadside signs that you can put out if you break down or somebody's broken down and they're partially into the roadway. Make sure you have food and water with you. I mentioned the one guy that he had a big Stanley thermos full of coffee all the time. Coffee, is great, but it's also something that your body has a tendency to take and want to expel a lot of water when you're drinking a lot of coffee, and it can actually dehydrate you, which then allows you to become more susceptible to the cold. So make sure that you have water to drink and food to eat. I wouldn't leave the shop without my lunch pail with some water and some food in it. Blankets, warm clothes. We're going to talk a little bit later on about some additional information about warm clothes, but make sure you have them. First aid kits. Most of our county, city organizations are required to carry a first aid kit. Make sure that that first aid kit is up to date, that it has the bandages in it, has the items in it that you may need. An ice scraper, so you can take and clean off that snow, that excess snow, off your windshield or off your headlights or off your tail lights. Make sure you have those. Jumper cables. With jumper cables, I'd refer to what your organization policy is. Make sure you're aware of what that policy is as far as rendering assistance. Some agencies have been a little concerned about their employees jumping a vehicle. Make sure you're aware of what their agency policies require as far as that's concerned. Make sure you have a flashlight and a batteries. I like to make sure that I have a good strong flashlight just in case I have something go wrong out on the piece of equipment that I'm operating, or if I need to take and check on a vehicle that's out in the ditch or broken down alongside the roadway and it's nighttime, I like to have a flashlight so that I can take and check that vehicle out and make sure that it's not a problem or an issue. Make sure your windshield washer fluids are full, make sure your tire pressures are correct. And if you get stuck or if you're going to be out there for a little bit, stay with your piece of equipment. We've had a number of fatalities over the last year here in Idaho with people getting stuck out along a piece of roadway that they really shouldn't have been on in the first place, and then they decide to walk home or walk to civilization. And unfortunately, a lot of those people succumb to hypothermia or frostbite and die. And so you want to stay with your piece of equipment because people can see it, know it, and then render you assistance if you need it, or you have access to your radio and that type of activity. Reduce your battery drain, use your emergency flashes only if you hear approaching vehicles. If you're with someone else, you can make sure at least one person is awake and keeping watch if you're stuck alongside the roadway. Make sure that people can see where you're at. For me, the one time I was stuck out overnight, I actually I left my rotating flashing light on because I kept the piece of equipment running. And then I also increased the idle speed a little bit because it was a diesel piece of equipment, and to keep that engine warm and circulating that warm diesel fluid through that piece of equipment so it didn't freeze up, I increased the RPMs up a little bit on that diesel to keep the heat going. So those think about those types of things as you're out there along that roadway. Can we, Mike, have question number 3?
Yes, absolutely. So we have launched the question, and we'll give everybody some time to respond.
Be sure to note that it is what is not a sign of hypothermia.
All right, and the votes are arriving. Got about 50% of the group, 60% has voted. And we'll give a little more time. All right, let's see the results. So Bruce, 14% said shivering, 9% said slurred speech, 29% said irrational behavior, 48% said blackened skin.
Excellent, excellent. The correct answer, of course, is blackened skin, because that's the next phase as you get people that are out in the cold, and that's where you start seeing blackened skin or intense swelling and pain in joints. That's frostbite. Um, the other signs, the shivering, the slurred speech, the irrational behavior, are all signs of hypothermia. So when you take a look at hypothermia, is the lowering of the core body temperature, and so that the body is going to take and lose that that temperature, dropping below 98.6. And what the body will do is it takes and tries to uh, preserve your temperature in your chest cavity and in your stomach. And so it starts pulling the warmer blood out of your arms and your legs and brings it up into the core. And then as your fingers and that start getting cold, they'll start to get, you'll start to shiver trying to take and generate heat, and you'll take and you'll have a problem talking, those types of things. And so it's a reduction in the temperature of the body. Where frostbite, you've already lost some of that temperature in the body to the point to where your fingers and your toes and your nose and your ears, those parts of your body that are sticking out, freeze, physically freeze. And then it starts killing the tissue inside your fingers and those types of items. So hyperthermia is you've gotten cold, but your body is able to take and keep your core temperature up, but your arms and your fingers and your toes and your nose and your ears are all getting cool, and your body tries to warm them back up by shivering and those types of things. Frostbite is when they've actually froze. So hypothermia warning signs, irrational behavior because your brain isn't getting the warm blood that you need, your slurred speech, your slowed heart rate, you're shivering, you feel cold, and you get clumsy. Those are all signs, warning signs of hypothermia. So if you start seeing those signs in yourself or in somebody else, generally speaking, somebody that's hypothermic, they'll get cold and they know they get cold, but they don't really notice the irrational behavior, the slurred speech, the shivering, or the clumsiness. They just think that, oh, that's just part of who I am. And so somebody else may have to actually point out and say, hey, I think you're a little hyperthermic. So let's take take a look at a little video I've got here. I'll bring up the video. Make sure that that you can see the video.
Yep, we see the YouTube screen.
So when we take a look at hypothermia, hypothermia is a very common item. Are you able to see my screen okay?
Yes, Bruce, we see the
Okay.
frostbite slide. Yeah.
Okay. So hypothermia is actually one of the issues that we have, especially we see it often in people that are out in the snow or out in the cold weather, but you can actually get hypothermic at a fairly warm temperature of 40 degrees if your body's wet and you have a breeze going. You know, we've seen people get hypothermic in those type of conditions. And so when you look at it in our jobs as we go out and maybe you're out there, you're plowing a roadway and you need to put your chains on your truck or some other item out like that and the wind's blowing and you think, oh well, it's only going to take me a minute or two to take and put the chains on. So you jump out of the vehicle, you don't put on your coat, you don't put on your gloves, you don't put on your hat, you know, your stocking cap to keep your head warm, and you jump out there and you start knocking the snow off your chains and you slide them onto your vehicle. Well, that whole time you're losing an immense amount of body heat. And as you're taking and working on that, your fingers start getting cold. You might start getting numbness. Um, you know, the best thing to do is be aware of that hypothermia because when you're out there plowing that roadway, it's best to take and put on a stocking cap when you're going to get out of that piece of equipment or some sort of an insulated hat because you lose 60% up to 60% of your body temperature through your head. And if you don't take and retain that, it can take and cause you problems. And we'll talk about some additional things that you may want to carry to protect yourself. Now, the next step from hypothermia is as your extremities take and are no longer able to hold on to the heat, your fingers and your toes and your nose and your ears can freeze, and that's frostbite. And once they freeze, they get very painful and they'll actually swell up. In extreme cases, the skin gets black. I've seen it happen to a few people. The skin will get black, the nose will get a little gray color to it. And then when you try to start to warm them up, it gets very painful. It's a very painful type of issue. And then it'll take and it needs to have frostbite. You have to go see a doctor so that they can properly warm your fingers or warm your nose or warm your ears so you don't lose them. Because if they don't, if they're warm too quickly, they're going to take and they're going to die and you're going to lose that appendage. So frostbite is a very severe part of having hypothermia. So how can we protect ourselves? Wear our layers. As you're taking and working out on the roadway, make sure that, you've got some fairly loose fitting clothes, something that's going to take and wick the moisture away from your body. That as you're taking and putting on the tire chains, you're taking and shoveling the snow, or you're doing physical work outside, you want to take and have something that's going to wick that moisture away from your body so that your body doesn't stay wet, damp. Then you want to take and have, what I'd always wear is maybe wear an insulated shirt and an insulated pair of pants, then wear a regular pair of good pants and a good wool shirt over the top of it, so that keeps that allows that moisture to come out into that wool, but that wool still keeps your body warm. And then carry with me all the time a stocking cap, a set of gloves, make sure I have some good boots on, not a pair of tennis shoes. I've seen that happen with some people. They'll wear tennis shoes when they're out there in that snow, and boy, those feet get cold. Um, but have those gloves, that stocking hat, and then have a good heavy coat, whether it's a wool coat, whether it's a big heavy insulated coat with a hood, or maybe a wool coat. Um, all those things will allow you to take and put on that extra device, knock the wind down, keep the wind from being able to get in close to your skin, and being able to retain that heat. Gore-Tex is a wonderful fabric. I have a lot of equipment that I have Gore-Tex in. The only thing with Gore-Tex is it does wear out, um, especially in the places that you bend, in your elbows, in your arms where you're taking and rubbing on it, in your knees, and in your backside, in your hind end. Because as you're flexing with that Gore-Tex, whatever clothes you have that have Gore-Tex, they eventually takes and stretches those molecules out in that Gore-Tex that it'll allow water to get in. So if you're wearing a Gore-Tex jacket or Gore-Tex pair of ski pants, or your gloves are Gore-Tex, eventually you'll get to the point to where they're no longer waterproof. And so then you're going to have to replace them. So remember that Gore-Tex is a great fabric. It works out really well, but you do have to take and replace them every once in a while. So be aware of that. The miracle fabric, of course, that we talk about quite often is wool. Wool is a great product, and for people that have a little bit of an allergy with wool, you can get what they call the smart wool. It's a Merian wool that I actually have a number pairs of Merian wool socks that I like to wear during the winter time to help insulate my feet away from that cold as I'm out in the snow or out in the environment. Wool has a tendency to trap that air and keep it so that it stays warm. And wool is insulative even when it's very wet, when it's a very wet type of environment, the wool will still help keep you warm. And so that's one of the ideal types of fabrics. Now, in some of the other types of winter survival types of classes, and I've actually taught it a couple of times where you know they talk about taking um, a little can, a coffee can type of thing, and putting a roll of toilet paper in, and then putting some denatured alcohol in it, and then when you're in your vehicle taking and opening a window and lighting that to help provide some warmth. I do not endorse that. But the reason that I do not endorse that is that I've had it seen people actually do it, and they take and they end up having that little canister burning in their piece of equipment, and they bump it over and end up burning the piece of equipment, or they end up taking and getting carbon monoxide poisoning because they don't have enough ventilation for that flame to take and do it. So I do not endorse taking and having that type of heat. I do endorse staying with your piece of equipment because your piece of equipment is going to provide you the protection from the outside weather, and as long as that piece of equipment is running, if it's a diesel piece of equipment, you can increase your RPMs of your piece of equipment so that the motor stays hot, keeps the fuel warm, so that engine can keep running. Most of our pieces of equipment, the exhaust system takes and vents out high enough that you're not going to get it filling with snow. But if you're in a pickup truck and you're stuck someplace in a pickup truck, you've got to take and make sure that your exhaust system is able to expel that burnt fuel, so it doesn't take and build up in the exhaust system and then get into the vehicle. But so stay with that piece of equipment, stay where you got that communication, and don't leave that piece of equipment. or if you're out there in the environment and you're hunting or hiking or doing some recreational things and you get stuck, don't try to hike out. Um, I mean, this last winter we lost 5 people here in Idaho for doing that very thing. They got stuck up out in the snow. They thought they could take and go and find help. The people that stayed with their pickup or their car or their piece of equipment survived. The people that went to look for help all perished. So you've got to take that into consideration and think about, one, plan for going out into that type of an environment. Make sure you take the right type of clothes, you take some extra water, some food, and that you are wearing the right type of clothes for that type of an environment. So, and they talk about, wool being inherently flame retardant. It won't melt. Wool helps to regulate the body temperature. Wool is hygroscopic. Wool is able to absorb that humidity but still keep you warm if you're in that cold weather type of environment. Now, this web pages, other resources. This is the ASHTO Winter Maintenance Computer-Based Training. They actually have a computer-based training program that I helped develop a number of years ago that takes a look at all the different types of equipment, the side sweep plows, the reversible plows, the wing plows, the underbody plows, the pickup plows, the rotaries, the graders, all those different types of equipment, and takes a look at the operation of those types of equipment. Then also at this web page, you can go in and get a copy, or actually you can go to your LTAP center and get a copy of the RWIS, the Road Weather Information System and Anti-Icing Program, which is also a computer-based program, so you can take and go through it. It's a self-paced computer-based program. They also have taken, and there's a video out on this web page that talks about the different types of anti-icing, de-icing products. I did not collect that video for the simple reason that it's about a 35-minute long video, because there's so many different products out there that are being marketed for anti-icing, de-icing. But if you want to take and be able to look at the impact of those different types of chemicals and the things you need to be able to get on those types of chemicals, we'll talk about it tomorrow. But by the same token, you can actually look at the video at this web page. So this is the snow and ice control work group with ASHTO. If you click on that web page, and it'll take you to their web page, and you can look at all the different types of resources dealing with snow and ice removal and also winter maintenance activities. So as far as the objectives, we talked a little bit about the pre-winter checklist of getting your equipment ready, making sure that you've taken and calibrated your equipment, that are going to put out your different chemicals, your different products. Make sure that you've done your inspection. We also talked about understanding the value of your right-of-way control and your maintenance along that right-of-way. Before winter ever starts, you need to make sure your grasses, your weeds and your grasses are cut, your bushes are cut down if they're going to create you snow drifts. We talked about the proper winging and the use of the motor grader, making sure that you're not using that motor grader to push your snow out and stack it up out where you can't reach it, because that's going to create you a bigger drift. You want to be able to flatten that snow out, push it out at a higher rate of speed so you can throw that snow out and have it flatten out to where it'll travel down and across your roadway. It's not going to continue to give you a problem. We also talk about doing inspections on snow removal equipment. My examples I had were basically on a motor grader, but all of our equipment, we need to do those same inspections that we do on that motor grader. Check the windows, check the mirrors, check the lights, check all the fluids, and do that. And like I said, I like to do it pre trip and also post trip. That way, then I can identify if I had any problems or any issues with that piece of equipment when I get back to the shop, and if I need to work on that piece of equipment, or do I need to get to them with the mechanic and have a mechanic do some of the work on that piece of equipment. We talked about some of the basics of winter survival, making sure that you have the right clothes, that you have some food, some water with you anytime you leave that shop, making sure that you're able to take and uh, have warm enough clothes that you're going to be able to protect yourself if you have an issue or you have to get out of that piece of equipment. And then we also talked about the other resources. I'm about 10 minutes, 12 minutes a little early, but I'd like to give a little bit of time if you have any questions or any comments about uh, anything we talked about either yesterday or today. Um, Tomorrow, of course, we're going to be talking about anti-icing chemicals, their usage, their advantages, some of their disadvantages, and um, so that'll be our program tomorrow. So any questions, Mike?
Hi, Bruce. At the moment, we don't have questions, but we'll keep the questions box open here for several minutes. So if anybody has any questions from either yesterday's session or today's session, please submit those. Bruce, we do have a thank you submitted already. So thanks, Bruce, from Laura with Arkansas LTAP.
No, excellent.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Laura.
Yes. There was a
Um,
question
uh,
from, oh, go ahead.
oh, go ahead. Go ahead and ask the question.
Question from Linda about can we make the AASHTO link active? So let me just mention to everybody again, in the GoToWebinar panel, if you open up the handouts section, you'll see the 5 PDFs there, and the PDF version of today's presentation, I would hope that if you open up or download that PDF, that AASHTO link would be active. If it's not active, I guess a computer search for that AASHTO link would find it. Question from Darren. Do you have any examples of what you feel is the perfect snow removal plan that you can provide to the group?
Well, the snow removal plan is such a large document, especially when you look at it from the organization. Um, because you're going to have a map of your jurisdiction, you're going to have assignments of or priorities of roadways and that information. Um, I'll have to take and I have a couple of different examples that I could forward and maybe have Mike put them onto the resources handout, but I don't have them right at my fingertips right now. But I can take and give you a couple of different examples, but they are a fairly large document. But I should be able to get them into an Adobe Acrobat file.
Okay,
So if you're what I'll do is I'll pull those up and make sure that I can get authorization to publish them, and then I'll incorporate them into a PDF and send them over to Mike, and hopefully we have them in the handouts tomorrow.
very good. We have a few more thank yous from Christopher and Damon. So we appreciate that. If
Thank you.
there's, yeah, If there's any other questions from the participants at this time, please feel free to type those in. And so, Bruce, we have a pretty good agenda for tomorrow afternoon.
Yes, we do. It's going to be a very full one because we're going. The main objective that I want to have you think about for tomorrow is what chemicals are you using, and then how does it actually, perform? You take a look at it. Unfortunately, we have a lot of chemicals, and like I'd asked yesterday, I think we had about 50% of the attendees yesterday indicated that they have a specification for their chemical, but by the same token, only about, I believe it's about 25 or 30% of the attendees tested their chemical. And that's a real problem because of how we buy chemicals. Most of your chemicals are bought by the ton, especially when you're dealing with rock salt or calcium chloride or some of the other dried chemicals. We buy them by the ton, and how much water's in them is going to impact their weight pretty considerably. And we'll talk more about that tomorrow and visit more about that. But I always tell agencies, anything you purchase, you should have a specification for, and then you should have the ability to take and the knowledge to be able to check it, make sure it's the right material. I'll take just a few moments to relate a quick story. I was the project engineer for our last piece of interstate that we built in the state of Idaho. It was I-15 from Spencer to Monida. And my job was to make sure that our materials that we're receiving, part of my job was that make sure our materials that we're receiving met our specification. The only thing is, and I found this out in the middle of the job, is that I rejected 4 super tankers of oil and probably 1,000 cubic yards of concrete off of that project. The suppliers didn't have a big problem with that because they just hauled it down to the county and the city because they didn't inspect their products and sold it to the city and the county. Every piece of concrete, all the asphalt, everything that I rejected went to the local county and the local city. And then the local city wondered why their concrete spalted. And that's because it wasn't made correctly. And so I keep encouraging counties and cities, just like the state of Ohio, they inspect everything. You need to take and once that concrete is laid or once that asphalt is laid, you cannot successfully pull it up and test it. So you have to pull a sample of it, and you may have to have somebody else do the testing, but you need to check it once in a while. Trust your vendors, but verify that they're giving you the product that they're saying they're giving you. But that's one of my biggest messages to the local jurisdictions. Verify what you're getting, because I've seen it happen too often.
All right. Well,
yeah. Go ahead, Mike.
I was going to say thanks, Bruce. I don't see any additional questions at this time. Do you have any closing comments as we wrap up here, Bruce?
Well, just the one thing that I also would like to comment is that in the number of times I've came to Ohio, the LTAP there in Ohio has brought me out for a number of different classes, and I've always enjoyed doing the live trainings there in the state of Ohio. And hopefully, once we get past this virus situation that we currently have, hopefully we'll be able to take and go back to doing some of those live trainings because it's so much more interactive when I have you in the room with me. Um, I really appreciate your efforts and your your input as I'm doing classes there in Ohio. Actually, in all the states that I teach in, I appreciate the students very much.
Well, thank you very much, Bruce, for presenting today, and we absolutely look forward to part 3 tomorrow afternoon. And thanks everyone for participating today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.